Hey there, friends and listeners to the Listener's Commentary on the New Testament. Welcome to a special episode. I want to give you a bit of an update on where we're at, and then I have a kind of a special treat for you over the next couple of weeks. Last week on the Listener's Commentary, we wrapped up the book of Hebrews, and we're going to be starting the book of 1 Corinthians. We'll do the books of 1st and 2nd Corinthians for the first half of 2023. And before we jump into that, we've got just a few weeks here at the Christmas season. So I want to say Merry Christmas to you, Merry Christmas to your family. And what I want to do over the next couple of weeks leading up to Christmas is sort of a break, helping me have time to finish preparations for 1 Corinthians, is I want to release two special podcasts way back from my first Christmas as a podcaster. So I'm still learning the ropes. The technology is still new to me, right? It's all brand new. But in the spirit of both Christmas and in the spirit of the Listener's Commentary, I thought these two episodes would be really super useful to you at this Christmas season. So we're going to look at the classic Christmas story out of Luke chapter 2. That'll be this episode. And then next week, we're going to explore a special study out of the book of Revelation chapter 12, and a special Christmas episode from there. And so Luke 2, Revelation 12, two Christmas episodes. That's what's going to come over the next couple of weeks, just one episode a week leading up to Christmas. The last week of the year, no Listener's Commentary podcast for the week. And then beginning in January, we will dive into the book of 1 Corinthians. So that's where we're going over the next couple of bit. I hope you enjoy these out of the archives special episodes of my other podcast, The Bible and Life, that I'm releasing here on the Listener's Commentary for you this Christmas season. So enjoy these. I hope you and your family have a blessed Christmas, that you fix your gaze upon Jesus, and you remember that in the fullness of time, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, to redeem us from our sins. So God bless you. Have a wonderful Christmas, and I hope you enjoy these next two special episodes. Greetings, friends, and once again, Merry Christmas. Welcome to another special Christmas edition of the Bible and Life podcast, and I want to extend to you and your family just the warmest Christmas greetings. So hope you have a great Christmas. Merry Christmas to you and yours. You know, this year has been just a year full of change for me and my family. All sorts of crazy changes, from job changes to starting some online Bible teaching resources and online Bible teaching classes, as well as this podcast, to the birth of my first grandchild just a little over a month ago. And man, just so many big changes this year. And as we know, change can be hard, change can be exciting, change can be challenging. It's just been really kind of a challenging, up and down, good, and yet challenging year for me and my family. And as we enter into the Christmas season, there's change there as well. And sometimes Christmas is just like that, and Christmas is hard. So having been a pastor for a number of years in two different churches, I know that Christmas is sort of this mixed bag, and for some people it's just a time that's magical and wonderful and everything's great and they're super excited about it. And for some people, Christmas is sort of a downer, and it's hard and it's difficult and family's challenging. And so I don't know where you're at with all of that, but I do know this, that the Christmas story itself, in fact, what we're going to look at just in a few minutes from the text of Luke chapter 2, the Christmas story itself is a Christmas story not about an idealized, magical, wonderful world where everything's always perfect and clean and easy. It's really about the real world. And so Christmas, wherever you're at, is for you. And Christmas says to you, it says to me, it says to your family, it says to my family, Christmas says there can be peace on earth, there can be joy for all found in Jesus, the Messiah, the one who entered into this world with all its good and bad, mixture and mess. He entered in to bring peace on earth, goodwill towards men. He came to bring joy to all as He reconciled us and this world to our Father and puts everything back to proper working order. So, wherever you're at this Christmas season, And whatever emotions you're going through, good, bad, or otherwise, may you find joy. Not so much in the experience of Christmas, though that's wonderful as it is. May you find joy and grace and peace in the good news of Jesus the Messiah. And so, Merry Christmas. I hope you have a blessed holiday full of grace, if for no other reason than because Jesus is King and Jesus reigns and Jesus is making all things new. So, Merry Christmas to you. Merry Christmas to yours. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas holiday. Today on this episode of the Bible and Life, what I want to do is I want to look at Luke chapter 2, the most well-known and most complete Christmas nativity story in the New Testament. And I sort of for fun, but also for really helping us think through how to study the Bible and what Christmas is really all about, I want to look at Luke 2 and compare it to sort of our traditional, almost sentimental view of Christmas. And probably the easiest way to do that is to think about every Christmas play everywhere that children put on in churches all around our country, all around the world this time of year, right? You have kids gathering for Christmas plays. They put on their little Christmas program at church, and they're dressed up in their little bathrobes or their little robes of some sort, and you've got angels with wings, and you've got wise men, and you got shepherds with staves, and you got little sheep, and you got a little Mary and a Joseph in a manger. And every Christmas, every children's Christmas play everywhere usually goes the same way, at least in kind of an American, Western, European kind of context. And it goes like this. Mary and Joseph, because of this decree that was sent out from Caesar Augustus, Mary and Joseph have to travel from Bethlehem from Nazareth down to Bethlehem in order to be counted as part of the census. And usually that means in the children's Christmas play, Mary and Joseph, they travel to Bethlehem all alone. Joseph usually walking. How does Mary get there? Well, Mary's riding a donkey usually in these plays. And so there goes Mary and Joseph on their way to Bethlehem. Mary's on a donkey. It seems like whenever they arrive in Bethlehem, it's almost always night. So they arrive in Bethlehem at night, and they're knocking on the door of the inn, and there's a cranky innkeeper, right? I mean, he's not even a nice, hospitable innkeeper. He's a cranky innkeeper, and he slams the door in their face. Sorry, no room. And there's no room in the inn. No vacancy there. And so maybe they knock again, and he says, I told you, no room. But there is a barn, there is a cave, there is a stable, go there, or something like that. And somehow Mary and Joseph end up in a barn or a cave, a stable of some sort. And Mary and Joseph are there, and Mary goes into labor, and she gives birth to her firstborn son, and they wrap him in swaddling cloths, and they put him in the manger because there was no room for them in the inn. And all that happens that very first night when they arrive in Bethlehem. That's kind of the story, right? In fact, if our children did a Christmas play and it didn't have those elements, it would raise some eyebrows. We would be curious. We'd wonder, well, wait a second, that's not how the story goes, because that's the story as we know it. That story is actually embodied even in our nativity sets. We have in our nativity sets a little Mary, a little Joseph, a little tiny baby Jesus, and we have shepherds and sheep and cows, and we have maybe some wise men even in that, and they're in this barn where all of that takes place. And when we see the nativity set, what comes to mind is the details of the story as I just told it, and it's replayed countless times every year in churches all around the place, all around the country, with Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus that way. That's the story as we know it. All right, now, think about Luke chapter 2. When you read through the Christmas story in Luke chapter 2, there's a lot of things we've added that aren't actually in there. There's maybe some things we've misunderstood because of translation issues or culture issues. And I just want to take a look at a handful of those to help us understand, really, here's what's probably really going on in the Christmas story in Luke chapter 2. So Luke chapter 2 reads like this. Now in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus. Caesar Augustus is the emperor of the Roman world. Caesar Augustus is his title. Caesar meaning emperor, ruler, right? Augustus is most high, elevated one. And so he is the emperor. He is really in this text by issuing this decree and this process in his administration of taking a census on a regular basis and counting all the people. It was a taxation census so that he could know how much taxes and what to expect, and he could line his coffers. And so Augustus issues this administrative decree that a census should be taken of all the Roman world. This was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone was on his way to register for the census, each to his own city. And so Mary and Joseph leave Nazareth and head back to Bethlehem, presumably because Joseph, at the very least, has family and family land there. It may be that Joseph himself has been living there and is only in Nazareth for a short while or for a specific reason, but really he still has family connections and family land in Bethlehem. That's the reason he has to go back, all right? And so Mary and Joseph are heading back to Bethlehem. Now, just a couple cultural assumptions that we should be clear. Highly unlikely that they travel alone. Trips like this were usually taken sort of as part of an entourage, a group of people, right? There was a whole party of people that would be traveling. So it's highly likely that, that would be the cultural assumption. When someone in their day read this, they would just assume there was a group of people that, for whatever reason, were heading that way. Some maybe for the census, some maybe for other reasons, heading to Jerusalem or something like that. And so they would kind of travel together for safety, for communal protection, for collaborating and working together. So probably traveling in a group, don't know for sure. Notice what's also not mentioned when they take this trip. It says Joseph also went up from Galilee, from Nazareth, to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David, in order to register along with Mary, who was engaged to him and was with child. So Mary's pregnant. They're making this trip. Notice there's no mention of a donkey. We've supplied the donkey. We've inferred him into the text, but there is no donkey. And can you imagine, actually, that if you're in, your third trimester of pregnancy, riding on a donkey for 90 miles, probably not going to happen. So probably not the best assumption on our part. My daughter is pregnant. She's at 31 weeks. I don't think she wants to ride a donkey for 90 miles, all right? Just not going to be a real pleasant experience. It more than likely, if Mary rode in anything, she rode in some sort of cart, pulled by a donkey perhaps, pulled by an ox, but she may have walked a little bit per day. We don't know, but there's no donkey mentioned. So that's an assumption, and probably not a good one either. One of the other assumptions in every children's Christmas play everywhere is that they arrive in Bethlehem at night, and Mary goes into labor that very night. But again, listen to what the text says. Verse 6 of chapter 2, it says this: while they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth. Well, that changes the picture. They go to Bethlehem. They're staying there for however long, an extended period of time. And while they're there, Mary goes into labor. So 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month, 2 months after they arrive in Bethlehem, while they're there, she goes into labor. Well, that raises a whole nother question. If they're there that long, they can't be sleeping in a barn for Maybe they could for 2 or 3 days, maybe a week, but if it's longer than that, probably not sleeping in a barn. So let's figure out what's going on with that. So while they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in cloths and laid him in a manger. Manger just means a feeding trough, right? So in a manger, a feeding trough, because there was no room for them in the inn. That's the traditional rendering. Here's the problem. The word translated inn isn't the normal word for an inn. It's a different word. In fact, it's a word that more often means like a guest room or a spare room. In fact, Luke uses it a little bit later in his gospel for the upper room in which the disciples and Jesus celebrated the Last Supper. When Luke wants to refer to a hotel, an actual public inn, he uses a very different word. For example, in Luke chapter 10 in the story of the Good Samaritan. So this word refers more often than not to a guest room attached to a house. Now remember, Joseph and Mary are traveling here to Bethlehem because Joseph has family or family land or family connection. Maybe Joseph has only been out of Bethlehem for a short time. We don't know, but he's going to Bethlehem because of his family connection there. That's the reason. And so they arrive in Bethlehem and they've got family. And in that culture, hospitality is a high value, and so to come to town and not be welcomed by your family is just highly unlikely. It's not going to happen, right? So when it says inn, actually what we're probably referring to is the spare room, the upper room, the guest room in the family home in Bethlehem. And Mary and Joseph arrive, and because of this census, perhaps, other family members are in town for the census, and so now things are crowded, and other people are staying in that room. So Mary and Joseph, there's just not room for them there. Or maybe it was so crowded it wasn't the appropriate place to give birth, and so they created a place to give birth elsewhere. But that's probably what's going on. In fact, most of these homes in this time and place in the world, you would have like sort of a lower level that was like a dirt floor where you would have the feeding troughs for the animals, and the animals would be brought into that kind of almost sort of like entry room, and the animals would be brought in there for the night. And then up above, up a small little ladder or some such thing, you'd have kind of an upper area, an upper room where most of the family activities, cooking, sleeping, and all of that would take place. Perhaps there was in this house an extra spare little room, and you have some people staying there. And what probably is going on then is that Mary gives birth to the baby Jesus in that lower level where the animals normally stayed at night. They kicked the animals out and they gave birth to Jesus right there in the family home in that lower level, and then they laid him in the feeding trough. And that changes the picture. Mary's not alone. In fact, in their day and age, women would help the younger women give birth. The other women give birth. And so she's probably surrounded by other women from the family, and they help bring this baby into the world, and then they lay the baby Jesus in the hay, in a feeding trough, inside the family home, because there just wasn't room for them in the guest room to give birth. That wasn't going to be the place it was going to happen. And so all of this probably takes place in the context of family and in a family home. Now, that changes the picture significantly of this whole thing. And so, does it really make a difference? Does it really matter, right? Well, at some level, maybe not. That's just details. Maybe it's not critical. But at another level, I think it's terribly important for us to make sure we work hard to hear the text rightly, whether it's this text or any text, that we make the effort to hear the text in their terms, in their culture, rather than imposing our cultural assumptions and our cultural bias upon it. That's incredibly dangerous. In fact, what I think is a really almost humorous example of imposing our own cultural assumptions and bias on the Nativity story happened in a movie that came out a handful of years ago just called The Nativity. Fun little family Christmas movie. We took our kids to see it, and yet it was loaded with all sorts of kind of Western cultural assumptions, and one in particular really just stood out to me when Mary is arranged to be married to Joseph in that movie. She goes out, sits down by a tree or by a well, don't remember exactly where, but she sits down by herself and she sort of sulks and pouts and is sad because she's arranged to be married to a man that she hardly knows. That is a cultural assumption that we have imposed upon the text. Mary wouldn't have been sad. Joseph is respected. He's a respected carpenter. He's got a reputation for being righteous, and this marriage has been arranged, and she would be glad to have her families have agreed to marrying her to such an upstanding, righteous, well-respected man. Not sad, but we've imposed our cultural assumption on it. And I just think it's terribly important, whether it's this text or any text, that when we're reading Scripture, we learn to not impose our cultural bias and assumption, but we hear the text rightly. Not only that, I think making sure we get the nativity story right is important because Christmas fiction can lead to a sentimental relationship to Jesus and not a life-changing one. So many people, they get the good feelings and all the good vibes and all that wonderful stuff around the Christmas time and the magic of the season and the sentimental picture of Jesus and all that, but it doesn't lead to year-long discipleship to him. It doesn't lead to this little baby growing up to be the Messiah and the leader and the Lord of their life, right? So much of our Christmas stuff is sentimental. Think of the song Away in a Manger. No crying he makes. He's a baby, a real baby, born into the real world. He's going to cry, and he's going to mess his whatever kind of diapers they had. It's the real world. Or even Silent Night, Holy Night. Birth being silent without epidurals? Probably not, right? Like, it's the real world, and he was born into a real world, into the midst of a family home that was crowded, and people were there for real-world reasons. They're there because of a tax census imposed upon them by a foreign ruling country. That's why they're there. And it wasn't just a silent night. In some regards, it was almost more of a violent night, right? They're there because of Roman imperial power and that being imposed upon them. And for the Jews, that was always inflammatory, and that was always a reminder that they were still under subjugation to foreign authorities, and God's purposes and God's plans in and through and for them had not finally been fulfilled. And into that world comes little baby Jesus, the Messiah, a real baby. And hence, Luke sets this story, the nativity story of Jesus, implicitly in contrast to Augustus. Caesar Augustus, Roman emperor, full of imperial power, living in wealth and power and status, right? Able to issue a decree and impose his will upon a foreign people living 1,500 miles away in Judea on the outskirts of empire. Augustus was known throughout the empire to have brought peace on earth. That was the Roman imperial propaganda, the peace of Rome, the peace of Augustus. He's brought peace to the world. He was deemed as soter, savior and ruler and Lord, right? And into that story, this Roman imperial propaganda of Caesar Augustus, into that story, Luke writes about the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, the true king of the world, the true king of the universe, who's bringing a new empire, a new kingdom into the world. And that story that Luke's going to tell begins right here in Luke chapter 2. And this sets up the rest of the story about this subversive new king, this subversive new savior who's going to bring a different kind of peace, not a peace imposed by military might and not a peace imposed by imperial subjugation, but a peace brought and wrought by the power of self-giving love. That's the strategy of God. That's the strategy of Jesus, the Messiah, to come in weakness and humility and vulnerability, to come into the real world among an oppressed people, to lower himself and lay down his life to bring God's kingdom into this world. And that's what's going on in Luke chapter 2. And you hear interpretations of that. You hear theological reflections of that all throughout the New Testament. For example, Philippians chapter 2 says this about the coming of Jesus, that Jesus, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, a thing to be clung to, something to be used for his own advantage. Like Caesar used his power and his status for his own advantage, Jesus didn't. Instead, he emptied himself. He lowered himself. He poured himself out for others. And you keep reading in Philippians chapter 2, he goes so low as to die on a Roman cross. The power of self-giving love. And in Luke chapter 2, that's the story we have. Not a sentimental, cute little baby who doesn't cry at his birth. We have God's Messiah entering the world, the real world, and bringing a new kingdom into the world by a totally different strategy. The strategy of self-sacrificial, self-giving love. That's the message of Luke chapter 2. That's the message of Luke's whole gospel. And so here in Luke 2, we have the Christmas story of God coming into the world in the person of Jesus, into the real world. And that means he can enter into your real world, wherever it's at. He doesn't just work in fantasy or sentimental or happy little worlds. He works in the real world of space and time to bring peace on earth, goodwill towards men, to bring joy, to bring light and life to everybody, right? And he does that in and through the real world and even through real people. Caesar Augustus thinking he's in charge, but God using his decree and his sovereign power to achieve his purposes. And Caesar's long since forgotten and his kingdom is long since vanished, but Jesus still is Lord, and his kingdom is still here, and his kingdom still is moving throughout this world in the hearts and lives and minds and souls of people who let Jesus be the leader and Lord of their life. And so this Christmas season, may you find joy in the fact that God became flesh and dwelt among us in the real world of space and time, and he can enter into your real world as well, and he can bring light and life to you and to yours in this time and in this place.